Issue 253. Unfortunately for Sonic, he was following towards Ixis for so long that he got the idea to use Larry as a human shield. At least Sonic's response was relatable. I love his furious attitude with Ixis. It's so refreshing to see Sonic be nothing but mad and serious with an enemy. So Ixis throws Sonic into the floor. And why did he let go of Hershey again? He didn't have to fight. He could have fought with her. Instead, he inexplicably didn't grab her again for a reason I missed. So while Ixis is distracted bragging, Hershey gets to stab him with a sword. At least that's especially insulting to Ixis because a mere mortal with nothing special about her defeated him with a cheap surprise attack. A part of me is annoyed because it should be the main character of the franchise getting to defeat Ixis. After all, it's always Sonic who defeats the boss of a game. This is just like when Nate defeated Ixis out of nowhere all over again. We already know Ixis is tough, so you don't need to have it so that Sonic's never the one who deals the final blow and always needs to be bailed out. I mean, Sonic managed to defeat Chaos 6 without a super form just fine. But at least this way they avoid the fanboy complaints that they had Sonic kill someone with a sword. Nothing would be more annoying than someone jumping at a stupid excuse to hate or dismiss the comic. The ending in the last issue made it look like Sonic would get to kill him. And if he was going to get defeated right away in this issue anyways, making it pointless that the last issue didn't just end with them defeating him, I don't see the appeal in putting out to appease reactionary fanboys who forget from the lack of dwelling on it that Sonic killed organic enemies of his in the games, like Eraser Jin, Chaos, the Bio-Lizard, and tons of Black Arms, and the Babylon Guardian, and maybe Dark Gaia. He also tried to kill King Arthur, and Merlina. After all, there isn't a non-fatal way to try attack with a sword. It's brilliant how simply the comic managed to do this in a way that won't look too dark and edgy for people. They just didn't show any blood, so it looks like she just poked him with a needle that looks like a sword. But it's distracting that Ixis somehow had the composure to not scream out in pain or anything in all that time. It makes it less satisfying if he doesn't act like it hurts. There's a panel reminding me of when Ganondorf was standing still with the sword in hand in Twilight Princess. It makes me wonder why Jeffrey's still able to make him say anything at this point considering how quickly it killed Ganon, who's also able to shapeshift. Jeffrey regained control and made him fall into boulders. The characters get down there, Sonic apologizes to Hershey, and Elias holds the sword and says Jeffrey has people who need him now and his duty to them isn't over. So he wants him to come back to them, because he thinks the cycle of revenge went on long enough. Out of nowhere, Elias says, "Get out of Hemnagus, now!" And I thought they killed Ixis off. What's so great about the Sword of Light if it can't do that? Why did Ixis ever act like it was scary to him and it burned him then? And why did Ixis humor him and take his spirit out of Jeffrey? Ixis tells him to finish him off because he can't take this humiliation anymore. Elias says that would be easy, and he could vanquish the evil magic of the worlds by killing him now, even though I'm sure there'd be tons of other evil mages born after this if wizards can even exist. But what will have changed? If he said that sentence, then this would make any sort of sense. But then he slashes at him anyways, thankfully. Though I don't care much because its impact was hidden by a flashy yellow light for no reason. And all it looks like is he slashed his beard. And yet that still makes an exploding yellow light. Why? Oh, never mind. He says the voices and mutations are gone. He also thanks him for his idiotic pussy's way out mercy. Jeez, this makes me miss Sonic the Continuation. While I don't like seeing blood, I can still respect the guts of the creator for making a Sonic story his way for the better instead of appeasing fanboys. The kind who would hate Archie Sonic in general no matter what because it's completely filled with stuff that they'd call too dark for Sonic. So why would any of them even be a part of this comic's audience to appease? Ixis holds the scepter with the emeralds against Elias and almost nothing happens. The fact that there's still stars there shows that there is still magic in it. It's just been extremely weakened. So I guess he's knowingly exaggerating when he says that his magic is gone. When for all we know, only the scepter was affected. I never knew the Sword of Light could severely weaken magic. That's very convenient, since I have no idea how they even managed to make it magical in the first place after the destruction of the Source of All, other than the lazy idea that they literally just used Chaos Emeralds on it. Either that or the Sword of Light always had at least some of the power of the Source of All, and it was always meant to be a backup for it, even though they would have had no way of anticipating that the Source of All would be destroyed. Chaos Emeralds never had the power to depower people. The Sword of Acorns drained Dimitri of his magic by sending it into the sword. So if that's what this sword did to Ixis, I wish that was explained. They could have the sword be surrounded by a yellow light for a while, instead of showing a whole bunch of panels afterwards where it's not there. It's been so long since the Sword of Acorns drained magic that you'd forget it could do that by that point. It makes me wish they could have had the depowering collar that was used on Scourge instead. Too bad Rotor was too stupid to think to make that. It makes sense that he was depowered because the reboot started with him having that problem. And it was more interesting because without the Sword of Acorns as part of its lore, we had no idea how he lost his powers. Ixis reluctantly gives up the crown and gets told to take off. Or it could get him arrested and trapped in prison to absolutely guarantee that he won't be a threat to anyone again. Since he still has his fists, and we know Ixis is fine with trying to kill people. The only reason I'm not going absolutely ballistic over this out of nowhere stupidity on his part is that I can at least see why he's making this decision, because Ixis was only a threat because of his magic. And he'd naturally think Ixis wouldn't bother trying any big plans without magic. The crowd acknowledges that Nicole saved them all too, and cheers for the nanites. Then the story has a flashback to several months ago, where it turns out Jeffrey was supposed to broker peace with the Overlanders because the people in the United Federation are worried about rebellion, so they need an outsider to investigate. This is padding. This whole scene. Hershey lampshades Elias assigning the mission to someone who has a history of hating and having a reason to hate humans. Yeah, that could have easily gone wrong. Why didn't he send Hershey instead? Making him shake hands with humans won't make him stop hating them. That's why after Sally forced him and Sonic to shake hands, they still ended up feuding afterwards. Hershey and him eventually kiss and say they love each other, and Jeffrey wakes up at the hospital in a confusingly small hospital bed. I don't know why he's injured though. Ixis took the fall in a transformed state, not Jeffrey's actual body. And obviously if someone can shapeshift, he doesn't have to choose to have the next form and have the same injuries. But to be fair, it would be like Ixis to intentionally leave the injuries behind to spite Jeffrey. And now I have to assume that the reason he didn't make it so that Jeffrey would need a body cast then is that he didn't think of that because he was distracted by the problem he was already dealing with and focused on Elias instead of Jeffrey. I love that everyone in front of him is happy that he's okay. It's so convenient. I know grudges are realistic, but that doesn't mean they're necessary for stories. Hershey hugs him, calling him honey, and apologizes, and blames herself for him getting hurt when the fall did a lot of that too. He apologizes to them all, and Elias tells him he doesn't have to go on for a long time. Jeffrey says that because being powerless is a fate worse than death to Ixis, he was able to rub off on Elias after all. At least the taunting gets karma because he coughs afterwards because he was transformed earlier. Yeah, right, because as we all know, Ixis needed to go to the hospital and rest for a while after every mutation he had. I'm surprised that Sonic didn't come to see him since it was already being so convenient with the rest of his friends being nice. Amy suggests going home for milk and cookies with cream. They leave, and Jeffrey holds hands with Hershey, who explains that Lupe delivered the letters they used to keep in contact, but Drago brought his minions on an unauthorized trip to a temple he wouldn't risk investigating personally. And when no progress was made, he ran away and assumed all the people he brought there were deceased. Hershey explains that she was trapped in the temple with the others for a long time. Couldn't he have sent drones instead? Boy, it sure was stupid of Drago to waste minions on this. I assumed he wanted to take over the temple because it was there, and that he didn't have any robots he could have used instead. despite being part of Eggman's side. You'd think Eggman would have a much greater emphasis on robots, not cyborgs. When it's not explained that to take advantage of the hero's unwillingness to kill cyborgs. Even Amazon has drones nowadays. You'd think he would be able to spare at least a little money for drones for him. I really wish it was clearly explained why Hershey was trapped in the temple. Instead, I have to assume that an Indiana Jones boulder was stuck in the doorway the whole time. And what's especially lazy is to not explain why they got out when that's really important, and what took so long. Not explaining that makes it seem forced that she even made it here. But at least it's lighthearted. Jeffrey flatters her in the kiss, and eventually says he wants to see someone discreetly. Several hours later, Dr. Quack says that the major wounds have already disappeared from Jeffrey. He doesn't explain why or ask how, so I have to assume that rings heal them faster. He just happened to go to the right place to collect enough rings. Dr. Quack asks why he can't have any normal patients. There's no reason he'd never have normal patients. Doctors tend to a lot of different patients. Jeffrey apologizes for calling on such short notice, and then reveals out of nowhere that Jeffrey and Harvey, who are nocturnal types that night works better for, even though most of the time they function during the day. So apparently the animals that are naturally nocturnal still stay awake during the day just because all the other people around them do. But they work better during the night for some reason. Even though Mobians have a lot more in common with humans than whatever animal they originally evolved from. So you think no trace of the nocturnalness in them would even remain. Because it's mostly purely aesthetic. For a so-called skunk, you never see him using skunk powers. At that point, you'd think Rough and Tumble would be nocturnal too. The story ends with it being revealed that Jeffrey wants to be a new recruit for Harvey Who. I don't know what he's gonna do with him next though without existent power. The only other thing that Secret Freedom Fighters could be useful for is undercover missions against the sub-bosses. And Hershey didn't defeat Drago and his partner doing that. So I'm wondering what was even the point of her going on that mission. Because I don't think she even accomplished anything. All I can tell is that she did nothing but help Drago's army, and Eggman would be thankful. It sure would be nice if it was established what she did to sabotage. Aren't Legionnaires always surrounded by other people? How could she sabotage anything? The next story doesn't seem like it'll have a point because it takes place in another universe instead of having Antoine wake up from the coma or Bunny come back home. Even though most people are sick of waiting for that. They did stories like this because Sega forced them to. There's no excuse at this point. A classic Sonic says it's been a while since Eggman tried to take over the world, and there's a rumble and they're surrounded by badniks. Wild Tails wonder why he isn't worried about robots he can kill in one hit surrounding them when he knows they can both just jump on them to defeat them. I don't even see the point of the story because it's not creative at all. It might as well be the start of Sonic 2. Tails conveniently finds out from Badnik remains that they're responding to a strong signal northeast. So that's how they figure out where Eggman is. And so he's told nice work, and they take the plane to head for Angel Island. Because God forbid they go to a new setting to at least try to make this creative. Knuckles wonders why the flying robots in front of them aren't after the Master Emerald, so he wants to investigate in case Eggman's plotting something disastrous. At first I thought Metal Sonic was literally behind him, but it can't be the case because there's Sonic too. Too bad, because this could have made Eggman look smart by distracting Knuckles with robots into running away from the Master Emerald so that he could steal it. Why hasn't he already done that? Considering how easy it looks. He knows he abandons the thing at the drop of a hat. You'd think every time he sees Knuckles he would just send something to the Master Emerald. Knuckles ends up landing on the other side of the wing of the plane, and it makes Sonic fall on his face. He apologizes while looking too silly, and Sonic says he already checked out the Death Egg as I'm still bored. Knuckles says the Badniks are heading for the island in the distance, and Fang shouts that he's coming for Eggman's head. Sonic saying piss woke me up and kinda impressed me. It does make sense that the attitude-filled teenage mascot would say minor swears. I've read all of Archie's Sonic. Swears are minor compared to how mature it can get. If I made it through that, I can make it through this. Why is Tails even considering asking Fang if he wants to come along with him like they're friends? That's more creative than him having a giant machine to attack with again in Superstars. Sonic just casually says, "Be my guest." It makes sense that this actually took advantage of it being another universe because Fang's never been their enemy or had a heel-face turn. He gets startled by Tails, but agrees to tag along because he wants to tear Eggman's mustache off. It'd be nice if we got to see that. There's still a hint that he doesn't like them and isn't going to become a friend of theirs because of how he responds to Tails condescendingly. I assume just because he's a kid. But since he is shown working with the heroes to fight Eggman just fine, it really drives the point home that Fang could have become one of the good guys in the same sense that Rouge is. Where even though Rouge isn't good friends with Sonic, she's still not shown doing anything wrong, it just bothers the villains. Fang's vehicle drives into a rock even though he would have seen it because he has eyes in the front of his head, and I don't know how it got up here when it was on the surface of the ocean before. So you'd think it would just drive up to a beach and stop to dock on the island. He smacks into a tree, and it's revealed that Knuckles is also clumsy in this universe, when he was never like that in the games. Someone's watching them from behind and glides, while assuming they might be good people against Eggman. And it turns out this was indeed just an advertisement for a fan game, as it tells us where to find the demo. Well, it didn't do a good job of advertising it because it looks completely barren of creativity, and pretends otherwise because there's an original character for no reason, when any fanfiction writer can make a new character, so that barely counts as creativity. It looks like it'd be a good game in the sense that Sonic Mania is a good game because it keeps the classic Sonic spirit and charm, and in the sense that Superstars looks like a good game because it's like classic Sonic. But if it's not going to do anything new, I don't really respect it. Pretty sure furthering the plot of the comic is a lot more important than advertising a fan game, which you could have done in just one little text blurb. The first story, by Sonic Wind Attack, surprisingly didn't have Sonic deal the final blow to Ixis, and instead seemed to pussy out by not only making a minor character with no special powers do it out of nowhere, when there was no reason for Ixis to let go of Hershey in the first place so she could do it, but by not even having it kill Ixis finally, which isn't what was being built up to. So it's good that Jeffrey explains that being powerless is a fate worse than death for Ixis. So that at least makes a good effort at trying to establish that this was a well-written conclusion to the Ixis arc. Yeah, it was still stupidly reckless of Elias to just banish him instead of telling Nicole to use her nanites to trap him in the city prison. You'd think after dedicating an entire issue to the characters trying to convince Elias that killing Ixis is the right thing to do, that's what he would do, instead of that issue being made mostly pointless. I assume that writer thought that issue didn't convince the fans, and that he thought Ixis was such a popular character that we'd want him to be used again after this, even though he's got no good story potential left now. But the preview universe doesn't have Wendy Witchcard to give Ixis shape-shifting powers and someone to side with, and without his magic, he has no reason to try any big plans that give him a reason to try to kill someone. Sure, he could become a Dark Legionnaire to get cyborg powers to the same extent as Leon Duh, but with his hatred of technology, I can't imagine he would do that willingly. And if he was legionized against his will, he'd kill himself. And Eggman would roboticize him instead of legionize him to have full control over him. So the only way Ixis could be a huge threat again would be if Eggman cared enough to make Ixis his new Mecha Sally with all sorts of upgrades to his robotic body. Even though he has no respect for him, and he hasn't fought him enough that he would resent him enough to do that, like he's special. And Metal Sonic did copy its Ixis magic, so now I know why that was even written. Maybe that's how they plan to give him his magic back. Oops, Elias really was an idiot. But I only thought of this possibility after a lot of thought after the fact. And in the heat of the moment, with no time to think because they're talking or listening every few seconds, Elias wouldn't have had the time to think about what if Eggman roboticized Ixis. He'd just be thinking that Ixis would just wander like any old homeless person. So I can understand Elias thinking he'd be harmless. And prison is really cruel. But none of the heroes refused to hold any of Sonic's enemies in prison when the Nanite City was first created. Bean was sent to prison right away. We didn't see the king simply tell them all they were banished and expect them to stay away because it'd be pointless cruelty to imprison them. So it still ends up being obvious to me that it's only meta logic that caused them to take mercy on someone who overthrew him, when you'd think a king would care about enforcing the law. Instead, it's just the meta logic that Ixis needs to be able to go free so that he can meet up with the other wizards that were released from his body. Anyways, Jeffrey gets freed from Ixis' body, and Elliot stops the mutations in Ixis just to be nice to someone he has no reason to care about for absolutely no reason. It was a nice treat that most of Sonic's friends seemed to really care about Jeffrey, and he got to apologize to them. And at least the story tried to kind of explain why Hershey went missing, but it didn't try hard enough. I don't know why Draco waited so long to get people to investigate the temple, because it must have been there for centuries, so you'd think people would have already gotten trapped in it, and that telling from historical research that trying to take over it would be pointless. I guess the story was alright. I'm glad it's progressing the plot of RG Sonic by wrapping up a plot thread at least. Although that's such faint praise, I wouldn't give that to IDW Sonic. I'm glad I at least got to see it progress, and that doesn't make the story good. I think I was disappointed because I'm not a fan of Ixis surviving. I'm tired of him by this point. The only appeal of him was his magic, so there's no point in keeping him around to use him for any more stories without his powers. The reboot only pretended Ixis had story potential after that, but Wendy could have been helped just as much by anybody, and I don't know how he got back his shapeshifting power after her. So the narrative cheated just so he could get to do something again without her. Zelda games have Ganon get killed off at the end every time, and they're considered for kids. So I don't know why people think in Sonic it's too dark to kill off its wizard. It already had a whole bunch of things that are way more adult than Zelda without getting cancelled, like Charmy having to get surgery causing us to see stains on gloves. Clearly it's the more dark and mature series, but just because the characters are anthro-animals, people think Sonic shouldn't ever kill, even though he threw a Razor Jin into lava and nobody cared. So people are vastly overestimating how much they would care if he killed an enemy of his. There's not much to say about the second story. It's boring because it's completely uncreative, and it wastes comic space on advertising classic Sonic fan game 5 billion instead of having more things happen in the real universe of the comic. I already played Sonic Mania, and I already know about Sonic Superstars, so this doesn't look interesting. The only thing I liked was that Fang was treated like a trustworthy ally against Eggman, and he agreed to help Sonic with no drama between them.